We're rolling. We're rolling. David.
Love it.
David, you're here.
Found you.
And we've got a great selection of whiskeys to go from here.
We do.
Yeah.
And honestly, I procured some of these, obviously the 2 unmarked bottles from the distillery 7-8 months ago. And I just haven't found the right opportunity, and here we are. This is it.
This is magic. This is magical. So David, thanks for swinging by. How's your January been? How's 2024 looking so far?
It's been a nice, I would say, smooth beginning. February is looking very different from January. We're looking at Denver, Vegas, LA. Obviously I live here, but I'm just in my head going over what's planned work-wise.
Yeah.
What else? There's another trip in there, I'm trying to think. And then I've got Texas coming up shortly after that.
Nice.
So yeah, it's good. I mean, it's, you mentioned earlier about how much you used to travel or still do.
Yeah.
And we typically would have done somewhere between 150 and 200 nights in a hotel a year, which is probably about as much as I would like to do.
Yeah.
But
right on the edge of too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I think once you become accustomed to the travel lifestyle, it becomes part of you, right? And you miss it when you don't do it. But you can still do too much of it.
And this is all within the capacity of being a Glenfiddich ambassador.
Mostly.
Yeah.
Mostly. But yeah, there's always some fun trips amongst that. Like, for example, you got to make the most of it, right? If you're traveling for work.
Oh, yeah.
Mix in a little bit of fun with it.
And we only got one life to live.
Well, as far as I know. I'm going to rely on that. That's the information that I have. For example, we went to Iceland for an ambassador trip. The entire William Grant & Sons ambassador team from around the world. It's the first time we've ever all got together.
That's amazing.
There was 100 brand ambassadors, across the whole portfolio: Glenfiddich, Balvenie, Hendricks, Milagro Tequila, etc. And rather than just go and do the trip and fly from LA straight to Reykjavik, which I actually don't even think there is a direct flight.
No, I think you have to go through New York or something else. Yeah.
I went through Montreal. I'd never been there, so I did a 24-hour stop in Montreal, and it was epic. So I can't wait to go back there.
Montreal is good fun. I played basketball in Canada when I was growing up, and played for the University of Toronto, and we were always in Montreal for games against McGill, and those were always fun weekends out. Yeah, Montreal is probably the most fun city in Canada.
And it's interesting because obviously French is the first language, but English is a second, is very immediate.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's fluent in both.
Sure.
And there was no awkward feeling of, I'm forcing people to speak English here.
How did they like the accent?
The usual. There's always someone that their ears perk and they ask you where you're from and stuff like that. But I mean, the biggest example of that was when I lived in Texas. Because
how long were you in Texas?
You're really an anomaly or a novelty in Texas. I moved from Scotland to Dallas in 2005, and I spent 10 years there.
Oh wow!
And then
that's no joke. 10 years in Dallas.
10 years in Dallas, and then had enough of that, and then moved to Chicago for 3, and then had enough of that, and said I need back into the heat.
Yeah.
Came back to Texas, to Austin this time.
How was Austin?
Enjoyed it, but as I moved from Scotland to Dallas and then Dallas to Chicago, I was always moving to a bigger place each time.
Mm.
And when I got to Chicago, I says, I'm done with big cities. I'm going backwards now. I'm going to retract into smaller places. And so Austin seemed like a good move. And I kind of got bored of it, to be honest, after a couple of years.
Really, it just was too small? Or because it's booming now. It's on everyone's lips, right? Because everyone's kind of relocating there.
Austin's a cool place. I really like it. I would go back, but I think it was just the timing. It was 2021/2022. And everything was kind of slow and getting back to reality. So opportunity to move to LA came along.
And there you go.
And I'm like, I said I wasn't going to do this, but there's an opportunity to move to California. So I thought, like you said, you only live once, got to try things. So I thought, California sounds cool. So here we are, 2 years later, still here.
Here we are, California dreaming.
It's a mixed bag here, isn't it? It really is.
That's the nicest way I've ever heard anyone say that.
It's just a mixed bag because there's things you love and there's things you hate. And that's
But like anywhere.
kind of like everywhere, but it's extremes here, I feel, because the weather, the climate is so good. It's unrivaled, in my opinion. Some people like the seasons. Winter, don't need it. But
Coming from Scotland, that's hilarious.
yeah, at least in places like in North America that get a winter, you have a guaranteed summer.
Mm-hmm.
Scotland, it's optional, potentially, maybe get...
Summer optional.
Yeah, exactly. But the traffic and all that here is the downside, right? Like the difficulty of traveling in this city is horrible.
Yeah.
So it's the trade-off.
Southern California is a bit of a mess, road-wise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The train system's non-existent, but when you've got a corporate card, you can just Uber everywhere. So that's all right.
That's not bad. So okay. We'll get into all these bottles and stuff that we've got over here. Oh, we've got a little. We can do that actually. So we can see what we got. We got lots of stuff here today. But let's get a little bit into who you are, because that's always kind of fun. So where are you from originally?
What we should also do, I think, is have something in the glass.
Okay.
Just because it feels a little sad.
It does feel a little sad just looking at it. What do we want to do first here?
I brought the 21-year-old to kick us off.
21-year-old Glenfiddich single malt whiskey straight from Speyside, Scotland.
Correct.
Beautiful.
This is a whiskey that's been aged for 21 years in the traditional way that Glenfiddich ages whiskey typically, which is a combination of bourbon barrels and sherry casks, so American oak and European oak. The twist on this is after the 21 years in those casks, they marry those whiskies together in a certain proportion, and then it goes into rum casks.
Oh.
So it just softens it up.
That's a nice sound. Here we go. Beautiful. Okay. We now have something in the glass. I do these like little Whiskey Wednesdays on my Instagram just to liven it up a bit. And cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, it's good to have something in the glass.
Right?
That's smooth. Very, very smooth.
I think it's usually your tastings are going to go up to 21, maybe 23, sometimes 30. Sometimes, if you're really lucky, 40.
Mm.
And every once in a while, 50. But starting off with 21.
Yeah.
That's really what we should be doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I got to tell you a story, actually. I was at the Balvenie distillery with my father a few years ago, and Balvenie have a rule that if you go for a distillery tour on your birthday and you have government issued ID showing that it's actually your birthday, you get to drink a dram from your age. So my dad and I were there, and then these two other gentlemen also came. They were from I think they were from London, and one of them was 40. It was his 40th birthday that day. So there were four of us, my dad and myself and these two gentlemen. And so they took us into the distillery and found a cask that was 40 years old. So this would have been like 2016 or 17. So yeah,
70s?
Yeah, going back to 76 or 77. And yeah, they put in the little turkey baster, and
I've never heard anyone call that.
No, but it's called
a whiskey dog.
A whiskey dog, yeah.
A whiskey thief.
A thief.
Bigger ones are the Valenches. You see them it's like this size, and they jam it in there, and
yeah.
the air sucks up. But the little whiskey dog.
Yeah.
I
love that.
Fun. Supposedly the guys used to have them tucked inside their leg.
Oh, really?
As they worked in the distillery, and it would be called a whiskey thief, really. And they would find a cask they liked the look of, and they would drop it in there, glug, 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 pull it out, put it back in, and that's their dram for the day.
That was beautiful. Yeah, so they put it in, gave us 4 glasses, and then we all just stood around in this like hollowed, massively beautiful room, just surrounded by old whiskey and in casks, and it's just it was so amazing to drink that there in that spot with like light coming through the window. Great scene.
That is a good point, because we were talking about old, very expensive, rare whiskey. It is special in a way, but then at the same time, is it just whiskey, right? Is it just like old, really delicious whiskey? I mean, but it's more about the it sounds cheesy, but the occasion and the situation and the setting. Because if someone just pulled out, let's say you're at a party and someone just whips out a 40-year-old whiskey and you've already had a couple beers, right? And you just get past it. You're not really focusing on it.
Yeah.
It's not the same experience.
That's completely true. The setting is so important.
It is.
Yeah.
It makes it, and if you're at the home of the distillery and there's a special occasion like that, and there's something about the dampness of those warehouses.
Yeah.
You smell the wood, and it's the whiskey-soaked wood. It is a tremendous smell.
It is.
It really is. I mean,
it's very special. Everything about it's special. And like when I was up there, I was staying at the Muckrack Hotel and Hunting Lodge, which is kind of like right in Speyside, and to go out and do the distillery tours, and then to come back to this like old hunting lodge, and sit there. And of course the bartender was, all they had was single malt whiskeys there. So it was just fantastic. The bartender saying, oh, try this dram, try that dram, try this. Oh, if you like that, you'll like this. And he was just so knowledgeable. So, you get a full whiskey education all day, and then you still come back to the hotel in the evening or the lodge. And it was just spectacular.
You're immersed in it, and it's, what you should do when you go there, for sure.
Yeah. So where are you from originally? What part of Scotland?
I grew up in Ayrshire, which is on the west, the lowlands, the west side of Scotland, just south of Glasgow. Most of my family was from the Glasgow area. I was born there, but as a child, I grew up in a house in Fenwick, which is a small village, 2,000 people, one pub, one hotel, pretty much one of everything. And great place to grow up as a child, playing in the fields, playing football every night, and we wander up the river and swimming in the river. I mean, just a cool place as a child. But eventually, as you become into your teens, we really got bored, and we couldn't wait to get out. And all of my friends now, almost all of them, I've got 2 really good friends that are still in Scotland from my childhood, but everyone else left.
Yeah. Well, it's Scotland's just not big enough, is it, to really like be that interesting for that long? I mean, I don't know anyone who was born in Scotland who kind of stayed there. I mean, all my friends are kind of all over the world as well.
Very tempting to leave. And I was fortunate because my parents moved to the States. Well, we moved to the Netherlands. We lived just outside Eindhoven when I was between 15 and 17. So that was my first experience of living outside of Scotland. And once I got a taste of that, I knew that if there was another opportunity, that I would probably try and take that. So when I was about, my parents moved to the US in about 2001. I would have been like 21 years old. And a few years later, I ended up moving over.
Okay.
And I've been here ever since.
Amazing. So growing up in a small town in Scotland, I mean, were you playing football in the
every day?
Every day, yeah.
Every day, especially in the summertime. That was it really. And then at the weekends we would go into Kilmarnock, and then as I got a little bit older, probably 17, because I came back after Holland, I came back to Scotland, and we would start going clubbing. We were all big into house and techno music.
Okay.
My friend Andrew Begg had turntables, and once I had a shot at his turntables, I got hooked. And that Christmas, that's what I got for Christmas, was a set of used second-hand Technics turntables.
So you're also a DJ?
Yeah, I've been playing music since 1997.
Oh, wow.
Kind of a little bit obsessed with that. Still do it. Do some live streams here and there. I don't really pursue it as a career or even a regular thing. I just enjoy getting the opportunity to do it when it suits. But that's, that was what we used to do, was we go to Glasgow, go to the Arches, go clubbing, techno, trance music and all that stuff. That was it.
What about like trips to to Glasgow on the weekends, because you were right there, right?
That was where the nightclubbing was happening.
Yeah.
So we would usually get a bus or a train up, and then we would get a taxi home. But yeah, those were wild days for sure.
I have a bunch of friends that went to university in Glasgow, and they talked about the nightlife being quite untamed.
Well, when DJs, we're always quite proud of this fact, but when DJs talk about their favourite crowds, usually Northern Ireland and Scotland, or specifically Glasgow, would be coming up top of the list as the most up for it, the most energetic, and places like London, for example, where they're more spoiled for choice, and maybe just a more international crowd, they're a bit more reserved. Is the kind of the what DJs would say. They would say the further north you go, the more crazy it becomes.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get much more crazy than Glasgow in Scotland, to be fair.
There you go. That's nice. So that's where you grew up. That was where you were into it.
Yeah. It's a brilliant place to. I'm so glad I was born and brought up in Scotland. Just the culture, the humour, and people seem to love the accent. I don't know.
I think Scottish people have a pretty great reputation globally. It's a lot like Canadians, right? We're just kind of nice people, bouncing around, hanging out, trying not to offend anyone.
Yeah, we do, fortunately. So, like the Scots and the Irish, for sure, have that kind of reputation.
Yeah.
Always up for a good time.
I played rugby for most of my life. Almost all my life. Like I started playing when I was around 10. But then I played internationally, and I was playing in Hong Kong, and then again in Shanghai when I was there. And I was playing with Scots like the whole time. It was just, they ended up like a bunch of them ended up being my best friends still to this day. And they were the guys at university in Glasgow who were sharing some great stories.
Yeah. I've been in the States for 18 years, and I've still got my friends, my good friends from, when I left Scotland, still in touch with all of them.
Yeah.
To different degrees, but I find it more easy to make friendships, lasting, deeper friendships back home in the UK in general, but definitely in Scotland than here in the States. Find the culture here is more, people are more individual.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, for sure. Also, too, when you get older, I think it's just harder to like make those strong connections.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I was 25 when I moved here, and I noticed that it was very easy to make acquaintances here. But in terms of like making deeper relationships, deeper friendships, like very difficult.
You really have to, I think like you really have to like go through like a crisis, or like growing up, right? Like you have to go through something with people around you. I think that kind of thing really does form those bonds, solidifies those bonds. So when you're young, everything's a mess, and you're traumatized on a daily basis. So you have your close friends around, right? But when you get older, life might be a little easier, or
it's more vanilla.
Yeah, a little more vanilla, exactly. And it's just you don't. So I played sports my whole life, so I have those. Almost all of my friends came through my sporting career, whether it was basketball originally, then rugby, and then later on in life, like climbing and trekking and stuff like that, all around the world. So it's been pretty interesting.
Yeah, I definitely was looking up some of your videos before, when we were introduced via email from Mr. Brian Kinsman.
Brian's a legend.
Shout out to Brian, master distiller, malt master at Glenfiddich.
Yeah, and a piper. Did you know that? He plays the bagpipes, and I interviewed Brian in 2020 when I was locked down in Istanbul for my like COVID calls, which I was doing on Instagram Live, an earlier version of this without the studio. And he agreed to chat with me, and we got into it. We talked about his growing up, and yeah, he plays the bagpipes, man. And after they would play the pipes and everything like that, they'd all have a dram, and that's kind of like how he got into a little bit of how he got into whiskey, and it was such a great story. I still need to get to Scotland and have a drink with him.
Yeah, big fan of Brian, obviously from the whiskey point of view, but just as a person, he's just a good guy and really fun to be around.
Yeah.
My colleague Lauren Cousin, he's also a big bagpipe player, and so it's you gotta mix up those. So that's why I've got the DJ, got the bagpipe players.
It's amazing.
Gonna mix up.
I love. I'll never forget this. I was at Turnberry once, the golf resort club, and I was staying at the hotel there, and every morning they had a bagpipe player go out and play the pipes in the morning to start the day, and I just thought that was spectacular. What a moment!
When was that? What year, roughly?
Oh man, that might have been like 2010 or 12, so it was a while back. But that's a beautiful part of the world.
Is that pre-Trump ownership?
Oh, he owns that?
No, it's called Trump Turnberry.
I didn't know. It was definitely before Trump bought it, I think.
We actually had a brand ambassador trip to Scotland with the US team. So not just Glenfiddich, the whole portfolio. And an email was sent out asking, we were doing a trip to the Hendricks distillery, which is just a few miles from Turnberry, down in Girvan. And we were asked if we wanted to stay at the Trump Turnberry, because obviously people are sensitive to that brand.
Yeah. Especially coming from the US.
Yeah. So a lot of people chose to opt out of that.
Really?
I shamelessly was not one of them, because I just wanted to stay in a nice hotel. I didn't really care. But we ended up staying in some accommodation close by, and we had a great time. We ended up swimming in the sea, and it was freezing.
Yeah. It's a rough sea in that area. I wonder what the deal is though with the Trump stuff, because I don't think he owns the property. Like, it's still Scottish owned and it's still Scottish run. I think they just, give him some money and slap his name on it. Like,
maybe. I have no idea.
In which case boycotting it just hurts the local community, right? Because if it's still Scottish owned and all the employees are local.
Well, it's a very good point. And as is the case with a lot of these things that people want to boycott, because on the surface it makes them feel good about something.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but ultimately, if you're going to take a stance with things like that, you really should do more research on more things, because you're putting your money left, right, and centre into things that are, questionable.
Yeah, questionable indeed. No, that's.
Do you know what's not questionable? This whiskey.
This is absolutely beautiful. 21-year-old.
I've seen these glasses before, and I thought, without seeing them in person, saw them online, I thought, that seems a bit kind of cheesy. I actually really enjoy them.
Yeah,
it's more interesting.
It is, isn't it? It is. So these glasses that we have, they have like little Mount Fujis in them, and they're not ice cubes or anything like that, because we would never put ice cubes in whiskey.
I would.
Would you?
Yeah. I was drinking whiskey on the rocks last night. I prefer, if I'm going to have an ice cube, it's going to be the small ones.
Sure. And
it's going to be one of them, not a whole, glass full of rocks.
Well, I love my whiskey chilled. So for example, I was renting a home once, right? And they had it had like a wine fridge, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I like my whiskey kind of cold, so I'll put it in the wine fridge. And then when you take it out, it's nice and kind of chill, and I loved it. I also love it at room temperature too, but putting ice cubes in it is always tough, because when it melts, it changes the consistency of the.
It does, but that's why just one of those little small ice cubes is more than enough. Like last night, we went for a dram after we were at a cognac event. Shout out!
Is all you do is just go out to alcohol events?
It sounds like that. But recently, in the last year or so, I've really kind of dialed it down in terms of going out and being in the bars.
Yeah.
It's hard to avoid it in this line of work, right? But I'm scaling that back for sure.
Well, it's one thing to go to a bar. It's another thing to be like at a cognac event or at a Glenfiddich event, like, because you got to keep your shit together, right? Because you're representing the brand. Like, yeah, but if you're just at a bar, you're just at a bar. But when you're at an event and you're an ambassador like you are,
not a problem. It's not a problem. First of all, we have a high tolerance. Secondly,
because you're from Scotland, or because you're in the whiskey business?
I think I don't think it's because I'm from Scotland. I think it's practice.
Practice makes perfect.
Yeah, practice makes a strong liver. I don't know.
Yeah,
probably the opposite.
Okay, so I got a question for you. What is your first memory of whiskey? Because, like, when you grow up in Canada, we get into beer very early, very young, and also to a lot of cheap, shitty beer, mostly Canadian. And you grow up in
Moosehead.
Yes, Moosehead. But that if you grow up in Italy, in France, you start drinking wine at a young age with your parents at dinner and stuff like that, and you start to get an appreciation for that. Was there a moment when you sat down with a relative or a family member and they introduced whiskey to you for the first time? Do you remember that?
I'll be honest with you. Scotland, I would even go as far as to say the UK. We don't have, as a general thing, good taste when it comes to alcohol in general.
But you guys make the best alcohol.
I know it's kind of ironic, and most people, and it is changing a little bit over the last maybe 5 years or so. There is a greater appreciation for this type of whiskey, good stuff. But most people, and I'm not slagging people here. I was that person, and that's why I can say that, and that's why I'm comfortable saying that, is because I was the regular person that drank rum and coke, that drank Carlsberg, that had no taste, right?
No palate.
No palate.
No palate at all.
And it was a friend of mine who, and I only have a palate because of practice.
Yeah.
And I believe that just about anyone can also do that. If I can, knowing what I used to drink, before I get into the whiskey industry, just drinking things just to drink them.
Yeah, just to get drunk.
And now it's it wasn't even, I wouldn't even say it was necessarily to get drunk, but like you're out, you're having a drink, I'll have another, right? It reminds me of another brand. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't know what you're talking about there.
You'll have to look it up, but it's Malort from Chicago.
Malort. And
Malort.
Is that a
The tagline is "I'll have another." It's funny. It's on YouTube, but moving on to whiskey. Once you get some sort of a palate, sounds like pretentious, but once you start to understand that there's more interesting things there that you can seek out. And for example, with this, all you have to do is pour it in the glass, right? You can have a drop of water, you can have an ice cube. Of course, you can mix it, but it's easy. You don't have to rely on having all these mixers and ice and all the rest of it. And I don't know. Like I said, people tend not to drink this stuff in Scotland.
That's wild, because I like the reason I fell in love with it. I'll tell you my story about my first whiskey experience in a second, but I love it because it's so clean. Like it's like it's pure, it's well made, it's clean, like no additives, no preservatives, no garbage. They don't, like it's just built for perfection.
It'll still give you a hangover if you drink enough of it, right? But
it's happened a few times.
But the thing about this is that you can just pour a little glass and just sit and savor it and enjoy it, right? I think different wine is nice with dinner. Wine is nice pretty much any time. Beer's refreshing on occasions, right? Cocktails are nice when you're in the mood for something a bit more, maybe you're looking for something citrusy or something like that. But this is just like beautiful, straight out the bottle in the glass. But what I'm trying to say here is that it's not because people can't appreciate it. It's just they haven't been introduced to it.
Yeah.
And I was introduced to Scotch through a friend, an ex-colleague, Sharon, who put a glass of Glenfiddich 15-year-old in my hand one night in this pub in just north of Dallas called the Londoner. And that was my local when I moved to the States. And I had this glass of whiskey and I'm looking at it and thinking, I've never drank a straight, neat Scotch whiskey before.
Right.
So I'm thinking, I'm not going to enjoy this.
Put some Coca-Cola in it or something?
Sip it. It's like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Surprised. And then that opened the door for me.
Really?
It was that quick and that simple. I was like, wow, I actually really like this straight off the bat. And of course, it was still challenging to, you had to gradually get into it. It's like anything, like coffee. You don't immediately like coffee. I like cigars. It took me a long time to actually understand what cigars were about and to truly appreciate it. Scotch was a little bit quicker, but there's still a little bit of a curve there to truly.
How old were you when you were at the Londoner in north of Dallas when you had your first sip?
Late 20s, probably 29.
Oh wow, that is pretty late.
Mm-hmm.
So as a Canadian, I got into it at the tender age of 18 or 19. So what happened to me was I was in university. We never had whiskey at home. My dad was like pretty much a pure beer drinker. And sometimes, like if we had a nice dinner, that there would be wine on the table, but I was never very interested in wine. So then I get to university, right? And of course, the dormitories are crazy. Like people are partying and drinking every night. So, but it was all just cheap Canadian, like Labatt's beer and Moosehead and all this kind of stuff, which is, fun in a while. And then every floor in the dormitory has like an elder statesman, right? So we call them like a don. Each floor has a don. So it's usually like a PhD student or someone who's also studying at the university, but happens to be, like 10 years older than all of us and can keep us all in line, right? Or who's there if we have any problems or need to talk to someone and stuff like that. So I'm sitting in my room drinking a beer. I'm doing some homework and reading and things like that. And Rob, who was born in Canada but of Scottish heritage, is walking by, sees me drinking this beer in my room, and he goes, "What are you doing to yourself, man?" He goes, "Look, come with me. So he takes me out of my room. We go down to his apartment at the end of the hall, and he always had his door open, and you could always come in and chat if you wanted, or if some kids were homesick and stuff like this. So it was beautiful. And he sits me down. He goes, "Look, you're drinking beer. I get it. It's great, right?" But he pulls out a Glenfiddich 18, and he goes, "Try this." And he poured a little in, and yeah, the moment it hit my lips, I was like, "I'm done with beer," and I was just like, "This is absolute like God's nectar." Like I loved it right from the very beginning.
Well, I'll never say that because I love an IPA.
Yeah.
I love craft beer. Now, I'm not big into, all the variations, porters and sours. I don't like all that. I like a pint of Guinness once in a while, but I'm like a little hazy IPA or a nice kind of East Coast IPA. Yeah, can't say no to that.
I remember I did a TV show a long time ago for Tourism Canada, and I was riding a motorcycle all the way across Canada, and which was great. It was like 74 days, 24,000 kilometers. It was epic, right? But Tourism Canada were like, okay, you have to stop in a few places along the way, like that we want to promote, right? So I was like, fine. And we were always visiting like these microbreweries and these like, mini distilleries and people were making all kinds of crazy beer concoctions and things like that. And I just remember like every single province in Canada like has like 1,000 microbreweries, and they're all doing something totally wild. And I remember like, yeah, some of these were pretty nice and tasted different, and you could appreciate them for sure the more you got into it. But nothing competed with this my whiskey.
I mean, this stuff has been perfected, by many, many, many families, many companies, many brands, many distilleries. And in each distillery has something unique, something different. And then, you look at even one brand and you've got everything from 12 years, sometimes all the way up to 50 plus.
Yeah.
It's playing golf with Kieran from Macallan. He was telling me they're releasing some whiskey. I don't want to blow up as
something top secret coming,
but something coming that's much, much older than 50.
Oh, really? From Macallan?
But he'll probably kill me for saying that. But we've got some really cool stuff here.
Yeah,
because everybody loves a little, what we call a cask sample.
Yeah.
This is a product that's, you can buy this at 21.
Yeah, for sure. You can get this at the shop anywhere.
These you can't.
These ones, what do we got over here? So we've got two straight from the cask.
I got some samples from the team at Glenfiddich when I was back there. I think it was back in, let's say 6 months ago. George looks after the spirit samples, and he pulled 5. Him and in combination with Brian, they selected 5 samples for us. I brought 2 of them. Madeira cask, 63.1%. Blow your head off.
That's pretty strong, yeah.
And this is a new sherry butt, so which is maybe I need to double check, but this says to me it's a contradiction because new sherry butt means that it sounds like sherry has been in there already, but if it's new, I believe that this is actually a new European oak, like it hasn't held anything.
Okay.
But I could be wrong. I need to look at the notes. I should have looked at the notes on the way over here, but this is 59.8.
Also very strong.
Yeah, and so for anyone that's tuning in and like this sounds like double Dutch, when it comes to whiskey, whether it's Irish, Scotch, or American, one of the biggest things that we're allowed to play with to give different flavours is the type of wood. It's always oak, but we can use different types of oak that has been holding a different liquid. So sometimes it's a bourbon barrel, sometimes it's an ex-sherry cask, could be a rum cask like this, and then we have something at the back here which is even more different. And then of course, different types of wood, different types of liquid, and different amounts of time.
Right, because like when the whiskey's actually distilled from wheat and barley, it all looks pretty much the same. It's just all white. And then once it goes into the barrel, it then absorbs the flavor and the color of whatever the barrel is, and that's how you get the whiskey. And then the longer it is barreled for, or the longer it's stored, the lower the alcohol content, right? Because the alcohol burns off over time, and that's where you get the smoothness of the age. I think that's my 5-second description.
I mean, so all of these whiskies, you can see quite clearly the different colours here. That's coming from purely the wood, right? Different styles of wood. So European oak, more dark reddish colour, usually indicates something like that. American oak is typically going to be this colour. So this is going to be an American oak cask that has held Madeira, fortified wine, and this is going to be European oak that may or may not have held sherry.
Right.
But all these whiskies would have looked the same coming off the still. We just create spirit, put it into barrels, we leave it for different amounts of time, and when it's delicious and ready, we bottle it.
The number one best, coolest thing I saw in Speyside, obviously visited a lot of distilleries, did a lot of tastings, but the guys that make the barrels and break the barrels, the coopers, oh my God, we went to one of those facilities where they're breaking them open, putting them back together, storing them, like that was incredible.
Yeah.
And the way they burn, they put fire to the inside once they've used it.
So that's called a cooperage.
Yeah.
And it's one of the interesting elements within Glenfiddich and Balvenie. Glenfiddich and Balvenie, two single malt scotches that owned by the William Grant family, the company that I'm employed by, and they share a cooperage on site, which is very, very unusual.
Right.
Usually that is just outsourced, but most of our barrels come in from different sources, from the US, from Spain, from France, occasionally from other places, but we don't build them all on site. But we do have a team of coopers that can monitor the quality of the casks, because they're all inspected before they're filled. They can rejuvenate a cask. So if they go to sample a cask and see if it's ready for filling into a product, if they decide that cask is not given the flavour and the aroma and the colour that they think it should, they'll probably suggest that cask is tired and it can be rejuvenated. So the guys basically empty, they recask that cask, they empty that whiskey into another cask, shave the inside of that cask, expose the fresh wood, and then retoast it and rechar it. So if just they send a flame inside the barrel and they turn the barrel.
That's what I saw. That was epic. Yeah, those guys are legends.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's one of the coolest parts of the tours when you go to Glenfiddich and Balvenie, is getting to see the cooperage, because it's not something you see at other distilleries. Let's pour this guy.
Should we try it?
Yeah. You need a dump down the hatch.
So good. Okay, what do we got here?
We'll pour small, since we got quite a few to get through.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
That's small.
Nice.
So
this is cool though, because let me just show that everyone here. This is not available in your store. Like, this is straight from the distillery.
It is
a special brand just for you, just for us today.
It's something that is a work in progress. For example.
Yeah.
So these barrels will be potentially used for a product in the future, or they may be used as a blending tool to marry it into a different product. But at the moment, we have all these different styles of casks, and we don't necessarily know if they're all going to come to fruition, if they're going to work, if they're going to be delicious. There's a lot of experimentation that's always going on.
Right.
And that's why, we're able to come out with weird and wonderful things like this one, which we'll get to, the Yozakura 29-year-old.
Right. And that's what Brian does, right? That's what Brian does at Glenfiddich, is he's the malt master. He's always coming up with these concoctions, coming up with these new blends.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun job, and I'm sure it is.
Yeah. They
nose hundreds and thousands of samples every week.
Yeah.
we are going to taste this neat, but it's a high strength, very high strength.
What's the alcohol content of this?
This is more than 50% stronger than the last. So this is 40%, the 21.
What do we got there?
And this is 63.
Okay.
So 40 to 63. So we're going to taste it, but I got the water, I got the spoon.
Okay. Why? So what is the reason why this bottle is a higher alcohol content than the 21?
So the 21 has been proofed down to bottling strength. They've made a product. They've got a blueprint for how the 21 is supposed to taste. Okay, so Brian and his team's job is to make sure every batch, every release of that 21-year-old tastes the same as the last one. And they have a specific proof or alcohol strength that they use as the benchmark for each release.
That's amazing, because actually one thing that people probably don't understand, unless they drink a ton of whiskey like we do, is that the amount of alcohol in it does massively affect the taste.
Oh yeah.
And the less alcohol in it is what gives it that kind of smooth, warm, like woody kind of texture and what am I trying to say?
I mean, I think what you are saying is that the alcohol is a significant factor in the taste.
Yeah, that's exactly.
So, for example, all of these casks that are aging in our warehouses, okay, we'll rewind. We filled the casks at 63.5% alcohol. Some of them we fill at higher, but we fill none of them less than the alcohol strength of 63.5. 63.5 was determined years ago when distilleries were trading casks and they wanted to be a fair trade. So they knew the size of the barrel, they knew the alcohol strength, they knew exactly what they were getting. There was no fluctuation, there was no variation. It was like a determined strength.
So that was industry-wide?
Industry standard, 63.5. Now, you don't have to do that nowadays. You can trade casks at whatever, but it's typically still in place. So we fill at 63.5 or above. As that, you alluded to this earlier, as that cask sits in the warehouse and ages, a couple of things are happening. It's extracting flavour and aroma from the oak, just as it breathes and permeates in and out of the wood. Also, evaporation is happening through that oak vessel. That cask is watertight, but it's not airtight. And we need that because we need that interaction with the elements so that the whiskey is pulled slowly in and out of the wood so that it develops the flavour and colour. But as a byproduct of that, you're losing evaporation of alcohol and water. And it just so happens that the climate in Scotland is quite cool, it's quite temperate throughout the year, and it's a high humidity. So we tend to lose a higher ratio of alcohol than water. So the cask will lose volume over time, but it also will lose alcohol content strength. So if it started at 63.5, it's going to go down over the years. So this one's 63.1, this one's 59.8. The reason this is 40 exactly is because we've used water, spring water, to bring that down to that exact level so that every bottle is exactly the same.
That's amazing.
So it could be 40, it could be 43. Every product's different. But for that particular one, they decided this is going to be 40%.
And for me as a consumer, I love lower alcohol content single malt whiskey because I just find the taste is much smoother and much cleaner.
Yeah, I think it's very common for people to assume that higher strength is better because they feel that it's been unadulterated.
No, because then it just messes you up faster.
It does. And I think that the high strength whiskey, I like somewhere in the mid 40s, somewhere in the 45, 46, 47, I think is a really good strength. But I will like to add some water or a small ice cube to that. If it's 40%, it's quite easy to drink as is, neat. But that doesn't mean that you can't add something. So let's get into this one, Madeira cask.
Madeira cask. Here we go. So this is 60. This is 63. 61 point.
It says 2023. That's just when. While we're chatting, I'm going to pull up that email so that we know what we're drinking here.
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
It's very hot, right?
Yeah, you want to breathe fire.
So that's not enjoyable at that strength for me.
No, me neither.
So this is where the high strength whiskey allows you to more room to customize it to your taste, right? When it's already 40, obviously the only way you go is down in strength when you add water or ice. So when it's already 40, you don't have a lot of room to play with it. But it's something that's cask strength, you do.
So these cask strength bottles that you got from Scotland, what is the value of these? Like, is Brian and his team trying to, get a taste that's fresh or new? And how can they taste it through the high alcohol content? Because for me, the alcohol level, if it's too high, I can't even taste the whiskey.
Correct. And they've figured that out. So they will nose samples, because they don't, if they were going to drink the samples, they wouldn't get through very many in a day. No. So they're mostly nosing things.
Nosing is
sniffing.
Yeah.
They use copita glasses that are tulip shaped, and they'll bring that alcohol down typically to around 20%.
Oh wow, down to 20.
So 20% whiskey. It's really technically not whiskey unless it's 40% or above in the bottle. But if you bring it down to 20, it's not really an enjoyable drink, but you've reduced enough of that alcohol to where it's not going to just attack the inside of your nose. It's going to be more, the flavours and aromas are going to be more accessible by bringing it down to that level. So that's what they've figured out in the industry is optimum.
So when they're testing out new blends, they nose them at 20% alcohol.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Don't punish yourself. Put some water in it.
No, I actually enjoy like tasting. Yeah,
I need more.
You need more water.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of it. It's like I put sugar and milk in my coffee, right?
Yeah.
Nobody tells me not to do that.
Sure.
So why the hell am I allowing people to tell me how to drink my whiskey?
Well, I have a theory, and I'd love to bounce it off of you. So my feeling, and this is actually after I visited the distilleries and after I talked to Brian as well, I want to taste what Brian makes or what the distillers make. Like I want to understand and taste what their vision of that, whatever is in that cask, is going to be. So I mean, obviously I'm not going to punish myself through a drink I don't like, but I definitely want to understand like where they're coming from with that creation.
This is an ingredient. This is a finished product.
Right.
This has been crafted.
Yeah.
This is a raw ingredient.
Yeah.
So by you drinking this neat, it's not what Brian intended. This is just an ingredient that we have in the warehouse
that's starting to become part of something.
For something.
Right.
And it will be reduced in alcohol strength to some level way below what it is.
Yeah, because you can't put that on the market.
There's a few reasons why we don't release whiskey at that strength, right? First of all, economics. Let's be real.
Yeah.
If you sold all your whiskey at cask strength, you drastically reduce your profits.
Okay, walk me through that.
Well, if you have a cask of whiskey, well, let's say you have a bottle of whiskey, right, like this, 60%. To bring that down to 40%, I have to add a lot of water to it.
Right.
I can then make probably almost 2 bottles.
Okay, so
just double my profit.
Right.
This is what people won't normally talk about, but it's the reality of it. But it's not the only element in the equation, because not all of our whiskies are 40%. Some are 43, some are 45. Some are indeed cask strength. Not many of them, but certain whiskies will have different strengths because Brian has determined that it needed a little bit more oomph, a little bit more alcohol strength to give it more of that depth of flavour.
Right.
And then others that he wanted to be a certain way will be a different proof, different alcohol strength. So that you taste this. It's soft, it's silky, it's easy.
Yeah.
Beautiful at 40. Actually, if you buy the 43-year-old in some markets, it's 43.
Oh, really?
Versus 40.
Amazing.
In the US and the UK, it's 40, but in South Africa, for example, it's 43.
That's interesting. So in different markets, they brand them a little bit differently.
There's not many examples of that. South Africa, weirdly enough, is one. I think they're just pretty hardcore over there. I don't know what it is. Jez, shout out Jez. But yeah, it's customizable. That's the way I like to look at whiskey.
Yeah.
You know, it's too many people get caught up in this idea of, drink it neat because that's the way you're supposed to. It's like, okay, well, if you're not enjoying it, why bother? Like, If someone told me I had to drink coffee black from now on, I would no longer be a coffee drinker.
Oh, really?
I like the taste of sugar and milk with a little coffee in there.
I'm hardcore. I just do espressos. Yeah.
I like a cappuccino.
Good man. Okay, so back to you a little bit here. So your parents moved to the United States when you were in your 20s, and you followed. But were you already working in the whiskey industry at that time? What were you doing?
No. Parents moved to the States. I stayed in Scotland. I did a 2-year. I actually applied for the student visa for the US, got denied.
Really?
Yeah. And they don't tell you why.
No, they don't tell you anything.
So it's just access granted or denied.
Mm-hmm.
So it was denied. So I was like, I was close to tears actually, because my family my sister was still in the UK, but my mum and dad had moved to the States, and I was desperate to go.
And if you're over 18, you're not allowed to join your family if they relocate, right?
I think I think 21 was the age. If I had been under 21 at the time, I had already breached 21. I was 21 and change. But if you're under 21, you can go in through the parents.
Yeah.
It's much easier, much quicker. So my option was to go in as a student.
Which university did you apply to?
I went to a what do you call it? A community college in Dallas called Richland, because it was like a fraction of the cost, right? And
sure. And your parents were in Dallas.
They were in Dallas, yeah. So I went over I finally reapplied, was successful. This was in 2004 to 2005. So they'd already been living in the States for about 3 years. By the time 4 years before I moved over. Within 6 months, mum and dad split up.
Oh, jeez.
So that was traumatic.
Especially as an adult, right?
Yeah.
I went through that as a kid, and that was much easier. I was too young to really know what was going on.
And it was just the three of us in the house.
Jeez.
And I didn't know anyone there.
Yeah.
Like, I knew a couple people, but not many. So they ended up splitting. I wasn't in the whiskey industry. I came over, went to school, did a multimedia web design course, which was one of the best things I ever did, because it gave me the platform to learn Photoshop, which has been one of the most useful tools in my time with Glenfiddich.
Sure.
Create all my own artwork, flyers, promotional materials, social media posts. That has been epic. I also learned a little bit of video editing, which I've become more proficient in as a result of that.
Video editing is such a useful skill, especially now. Yeah,
for sure. So I was very fortunate I chose it.
Yeah.
But here's how I chose it. I tried to
tell me you flipped a coin. Tell me you just flipped a coin.
I tried to continue my audio engineering course. Couldn't find the credits wouldn't transfer. Right?
Oh, really?
A few of them, but I was basically going to start again. And I was like, didn't even enjoy it that much.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I could have used an audio engineer for this whole setup.
I think you've done okay. So I'm in this college. I'm in line to speak to an admissions clerk or whatever to get an appointment, and I'm literally going A to Z through the thing, the prospectus, whatever they call it, and I get to M, and I see multimedia web design. I think there's jobs in that.
Yeah. And this was like 2003 to 2005, something like that.
4 or 5.
Yeah.
2004. I'm thinking, well, I've done this audio engineering course. It's very difficult to get work in that field, very competitive, and there's not many jobs. I thought multimedia web design, doing that. So anyway, did that. Fantastic, very cool course. The first time I ever enjoyed college in my life was that.
Wow, that's saying something.
Hated school with a passion. I couldn't stand school. Couldn't wait to get out of it. Went to college when I left school. Left that after 3 months. College dropout, Kanye West. And yeah, it was different when you go to college and you actually choose something that's useful and you can see that you're going to be able to make money from it.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Like, I mean, vocational training education should be massive, and it's not. There's too many people just going into these like 4-year diploma things and like learning about philosophy. So international politics on my side.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I said for years that if I was to go back and be 16 again, I would have left school at 16, got a trade. Now, that thought is even more relevant than ever,
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Make a lot of money as a tradesman now.
Yeah.
Right. So shout out Steve, my partner for the. We run a fan page for the Rangers Football Club, RFC of Ibrox, and he's a carpenter.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, he's been doing it for 30 years. I think he's over it now. But no, that's what I would do. I would go back and do that. And, going to college is great if you're into that and you think you can do it. And I just was never. I couldn't keep my concentration in the school. If I didn't think it was useful, I wasn't interested.
The other thing too I find is sometimes with colleges and universities, like it's just such a safe environment. Like everyone kind of treats you nice, and everyone's just like it's just so warm and fuzzy that like people end up staying too long. Like they're like it's very common, especially at the University of Toronto. Like people just end up being like career students, and they just end up staying in college for like a decade, just taking stuff again and again because going out into the fucking real world sucks.
Well, it reminds me of like watching motivational videos, which I love watching, by the way. I've been hooked on Jim Rohn recently. Do you know who he is?
Yes, I know who he is.
What do you think?
It's okay. I mean, it's all good. I mean, whatever your flavor is, Tony Robbins, they're all kind of the same.
You have to do something with it.
Yeah.
Because if you just sit and listen to it all day, nothing's changing.
No.
But it can really spark some ideas and kind of kickstarts things for you. But where were we? How did we go into Jim Rohn?
Your multimedia college, you loved it, and it was the first time you ever loved learning something. Yeah.
And then eventually got into whiskey. But the fact that I had friends, a friend that was in the industry, I was Scottish. She said, you're good with people, you like to, entertain, this, that, and the other. And then I got into it serendipitously. But it wasn't just a case of you're Scottish, here's the job. It was...
And there's a secret handshake, right?
Well, it was you're Scottish, you're my friend, I'm going to help you create a part-time job. So
right, that's nice.
I was still doing web design by day, did the whiskey stuff for 2 years part-time, and then it led into the full-time gig.
Well, no one really knows like how to become a whiskey ambassador. Like I would love to become a whiskey ambassador somehow. Well, but like I'm a watch ambassador. Like that's an interesting thing.
You say that, right? Ryan, you can't afford this house if you're a whiskey ambassador. Right, so you're fine.
I've done some other things too. Yeah.
But if it was just a passion point, it's been the most incredible. Like moving to the US is probably the best decision I ever made. Second to that would be getting involved with Glenfiddich in this role. It's brought me so many amazing experiences. With people, with places, with amazing whiskies.
Well, I love the stories, right? I love the people. Like again, everyone I've ever met in and around whiskey has just been amazing, right? As a human being. But I love the history and the tradition. Like I love you just that it's just so well made over like 150 years, right? Since like 1860 what? Well, what's Glenfiddich?
1887.
1887.
There's distilleries that go back to the 1700s.
Yeah.
It is epic.
It is epic. That's exactly it. Really it's such a...
Honestly is. And I've actually got friends who have gently started to appreciate whiskey over the last few years, slowly but surely, because, I've introduced them to a couple things, and they've really started to see, like, wow, I can't believe this is a Scottish product. It is really, really fantastic. And most people it just flies right over their head. It's not on the radar to really appreciate it.
I agree. And let me tell you this. So I got into I kind of grew up in China. Like my adult life was in China. I moved there when I was 22, and I was working with the New York Times, and sometimes after a tough story or a tough day traveling around visiting some remote part of China where something was going on that we were reporting on, it was like nice to come back to a hotel, and have a drink in the evening and like wind down, right? Because sometimes the days were quite anxiety filled because sometimes the stories we were working on were not always popular with the Chinese government.
Right.
So we were always kind of getting in trouble, and it was a nice kind of relaxer to kind of calm down. And I really kind of got into that. And then as I started traveling around the world making television, I was basically making TV like with my two best friends, Chad and Jesse, and Dan as well, like my camera operators, my director of photography and stuff. And we would trek through a jungle for 12 hours, set camp, eat, and then we'd have our whiskey in a little flask, right? And we would have a few little flasks with us, and we'd just have a couple little sips from the thing, and then just go to bed. And that just became such a beautiful routine to sit around a campfire or to sit on the edge of a mountain, watch the sunset and enjoy, a beautiful handcrafted beverage.
And I think that's we're talking about settings for drinking and enjoying whiskey. Like, I wouldn't necessarily ever think to have a beer before bed.
Yeah.
Or probably even a glass of wine. But just that little nip of something warm.
It does. For me, it's such a soothing feeling from lips, like to gut. Like it warms the whole process up.
Doesn't that, it makes sense that the type of whiskey that's made in Scotland comes from Scotland because of the way that the weather, the cold gets through whatever you're wearing into your bones, and it's damp and it's cold, and this, we're not supposed to say this, right, but it goes hand in hand with cold weather.
It does, for sure, yes.
That's why we don't chastise people for using ice, because in warm climates, who wants to come in, I used to live in Texas, who wants to come in from 100 degrees and drink a neat room temperature Scotch?
No, that's tough. I agree, yeah.
So, like, at that point, you're either having an ice cold beer or you're slinging an ice cube in there. Or you're maybe having a glass of water, who knows?
I'll tell you this, we, my buddies and I, we were filming at, we climbed Aconcagua a couple of years ago, which is the highest mountain in the Americas. So it's 7,000 meters. So it's about like 24,000 feet.
Where?
Yeah, Argentina. And so we climbed Aconcagua and we filmed the whole thing. It's a great episode of television. And but of course, when we're climbing at that altitude, we weren't drinking, obviously. When we're doing like trips through the desert or when we're doing stuff in the forests and the jungles, we would have some flasks with us and have a nibble in the evening and then go to bed. But when we're climbing high altitude, dehydration is like a real problem. So we would always not, but we would always have whiskey with us and then celebrate when we came back down. So we climbed Aconcagua, and it was a terrible climb because it was, number one, it was incredibly difficult. The weather was against us that week. A couple people died. So we had to watch like bodies coming off the mountain, which was quite hard. And then eventually we made it up to the top and got to the summit. And then we came back down. And so for people who don't know, to get to the Aconcagua base camp from the entrance of the national park, it's like a 2-day hike. So it's a 2-day hike out as well, which sucks, especially to leave, like to take 2 days to get back to a hotel or something like that after you've already summited. Obviously, Everest and stuff takes longer, but there's a helicopter. And obviously, if you're a rich guy, you can jump in the helicopters. But the helicopter is like $1,000 a person to go, to go one way. So as we're coming back down from the summit, we're all joking like, oh yeah, let's have some whiskey. We've got the whiskey in the bags down at base camp and stuff like that. So we got back down to base camp and we're having some whiskeys and we're like, yeah, we did it. Like the high was amazing, right? And again, the scenery, the moment, the friendship, the sun was kind of setting, late afternoon, and we're all sipping on our flasks, and then the helicopter shows up out of nowhere, comes up, and the pilot is just a rock star, and he comes in through the camp and he goes, anyone want to go down? And we're like, no, it's too expensive. And he goes, well, how many guys are you? And we were like, well, there's 4 of us. He goes, $1,000, all 4 of you. Let's go right now. And we were like, wow, let's go. So we're all drinking our flasks in the back of the helicopter, ripping through these mountains, coming down off the Aconcagua base camp. It was fucking amazing. Yeah, it was great. I just remember that. Just trying to put the seatbelt on in the helicopter while still enjoying the flask. Yeah.
What a buzz.
Oh man, there's some good days. Some very good days. But the setting, the scenery, the nature. I feel like having a drink, in a spectacular spot, and this was my whole life. Like I did this for a decade, right? So we were just constantly just enjoying beautiful single malt whiskey in all the most beautiful destinations around the world.
The last time I can remember camping was a couple of years ago, and me and a friend Richie, we went out to the Galloway Forest in the southwest of Scotland. It's probably about an hour from where I grew up, a couple hours maybe. But it's a dark sky area. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, what's a dark sky area?
It's like a designated area for stargazing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
There's a whole this was the first I learned about it. But it was I think it was one of the first dark sky designated areas in the UK. Obviously, you're just kind of very remote, right? So we got this really nice bottle of whiskey, and there's just two of us, and it was very delicious.
Yeah.
The scenery, and it had just rained, and the rain disappears, but it's this beautiful sunset, and it's summertime. And midges are out. Don't know if you know what midges are.
Yeah, like the little bugs that bite you. Those are the worst.
So Richie had told me to bring a midgie net, hood, thing, and I was like, nah. He's like, no, trust me. So I bought it, $5. It was the best $5 I've ever spent.
Yeah. It's like a whole thing that goes over, and it's a mesh. Yeah, so it keeps the bugs off of you, so that you can like eat
Correct.
and just sit outside, which is terrible.
Because in Scotland, if you're in a place where the midges are out bad, you can't be outside.
Yeah, it's like Arctic Canada too, and like all these like really northern parts of the world in the summertime. It's
just these tiny little nips, and it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. And
that's a great way to describe it,
right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, we've got our cups with the whiskey, and the whiskey go inside the thing, and I'm holding it, and the bugs are trying to get in, but they're not getting in. Wake up in the morning, and I'm a pounding headache, and I'm thinking to myself, well, at least maybe we've got a nip in the morning. Bottle's gone.
Bottle's gone. Yeah, two grown men. One bottle of whiskey. That's not a bad. That's not a hard thing to do in one night.
It's not a hard thing to do, but technically speaking, it's still a lot of booze, and it was a high strength bottle as well.
Yeah.
So anyway, but to your point about the setting, you just kind of like get lost in it, and you're like, wow, this is the perfect setting for this situation.
It is. There's something about it that's quite special.
And I'm now into cigars that and that's another like my good friend Alan Rubin of Alec Bradley Cigars recently just sold the company. He always, I don't know if it's his line or if it's just a typical line, but anyway, the line is, a cigar is like a vacation without going anywhere.
A cigar is like a vacation without going anywhere.
I think the line was that a cigar is like a 45-minute vacation without leaving, something like that. Because basically, you don't smoke, well, unless you're playing golf, but you don't really typically smoke a cigar and then go about your business. You sit down and you smoke it to completion. The same way you do with a nice whiskey, you sit down, you enjoy it.
Well, sometimes I work in the evening and, I sip on a whiskey, or sometimes I'm doing something creative, or, I'm thinking about, some place I want to go and I'm planning my next adventure or something like that. And I'll be sipping on a whiskey. I don't necessarily like stop everything I'm doing when I'm enjoying a whiskey. Sometimes I'm chatting with friends and also enjoying a dram.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Multitasking. I'll get a little sip here before we get into the next cask strength sample.
Yeah, what are we doing next?
This first of all, the Madeira. What do you think? You didn't put any water in it yet.
I did put some water in it. I did put a spoon of water in it. It did smooth it out a lot. It did smooth it out a lot, but it's still hurting.
Yeah, it shouldn't hurt. That's why.
Yeah.
You need to bring it to the point where you still want that warmth. That heat is part of the experience, but if it's painful, it's too much.
For sure,
in my opinion. But this has a richness to it, like reminds me of bread pudding.
Bread pudding. Is that a specific? That might be a specific Scottish reference.
I always compare my whiskies to some sort of dessert.
Yeah. Do you? Well, some of them are too sweet. I'll be honest with you. Like, I absolutely hate when whiskeys are too sweet. Like like all the American like bourbons and all this stuff. It's just, it tastes like licorice or candy.
Yeah.
I cannot handle it. It needs to be like dry and just rock solid.
Corn is a much sweeter grain to use, and a lot of American whiskey is dominated by corn. This is all made 100% malted barley, and barley, for whatever reason, is makes delicious whiskey.
It does, doesn't it? Like, I remember I was in Louisville, Kentucky, and we went to a bourbon distillery and we did like a tour and stuff like that. And I just didn't like any of it. It just didn't taste. It didn't work for my palate at all.
I don't drink a lot other whiskies outside of single malt Scotch, and that's not because I'm like just boring or
a whiskey snob.
or tied to the brand. It's nothing to do with that. It's just like, hey, if I'm not drinking this stuff, I'm probably drinking something different completely.
Yeah.
A beer or a glass of wine or a cocktail. But obviously I've tried many ryes, many bourbons, many Japanese whiskies, many Irish whiskies, and there's amazing versions of all of those. But the American whiskies, they tend to be a little bit one-dimensional for me.
Very much so. I feel the same way.
Yeah, so not as interesting. Can still be delicious and enjoyable, but not really my go-to.
Yeah. So here's a question for you. So a lot of people don't understand this very well, but I've also learned, through my appreciation of whiskey, that a lot of the flavor comes from the casks, the barrels, which we talked about. But also a lot of flavor comes from the groundwater. And in Speyside, for example, the groundwater and the water that the rain goes through, the rain lands on the soil, on the surface, and then it filtrates through the soil and then ends up, in the aquifers underground, and then it's pumped out and used for water, whiskey, all kinds of things, right? But the soil is totally different in eastern Scotland from western Scotland, right? And then of course you've got, the Glenfiddichs and the Macallans and the Belvanys that are all in Speyside on the east coast, and then on the west coast, the soil is different. It's got peat in it, right? And then all of that whiskey tastes completely different than what than the Speyside stuff. And I absolutely love Lagavulin. Like, that's one of my favorite whiskeys. I love the peatiness of that, and I fell in love with just the variations within Scotland.
Yeah. The peat is an interesting topic within Scotch, because a lot of people mistakenly think that Scotch whiskey is typically going to be peaty or smoky.
Yeah, smoky.
And the majority of them aren't. It's a select few distilleries that decide to use that style, and that the majority of that peaty, smoky characteristic is coming from the treatment of the barley.
The treatment of the barley, not the treatment of the water.
No.
Oh, my mistake.
No, that doesn't mean that the water doesn't have an effect. It definitely does, but the main way that smoky character gets into the Lagavulins and the Laphroaigs is how they treat the barley. And they used to use, pretty much every distillery once upon a time would have used peat cut out of the land as a fuel source to dry the barley. So essentially, the very, very beginning process of making malt whiskey is you take the barley, you steep it in water, and then you dry it. So you're tricking the barley into trying to grow, because you want to maximize the starches, the available starches, because you convert the starches to sugars, and then you use the sugars to create alcohol. So you go through this process, what they call malting, hence the name malt whiskey, single malt whiskey. Single means single distillery. Malt means malted barley, right?
Oh, we got to get into the single distillery stuff later, and the difference between single malt and blended, because this is a huge issue for me.
It's a huge issue for most people, because most people couldn't articulate it if they had a gun to their head.
I can't.
It's difficult.
I'm going to be ready to do it.
It's very tricky, but it's very nuanced. But the barley would then be dried on a floor, open air, or in a building, but like exposed to the air.
I've seen.
And then the final process of drying the barley is you take the barley and you dry it using a fire. So it would be, imagine there's a second floor here that is a perforated floor. The fire's in here. This is the kiln, and the barley is sent upstairs to absorb the heat. And if you use peat as the fuel source, you inadvertently, back in the day, inadvertently create this smoky character from the peat smoke.
And that's how Lagavulin and Laphroaig get their flavor.
That's how Scotch whisky became peated. Through the industrialisation of the country, able to get access to coal that didn't impact the whisky with the smoky character. Distilleries moved away from using peat. It was an inefficient fuel source. But some distilleries decided to keep that method. So now there's a split. Everything was smoky once upon a time, pretty much. And then there was a decision. So now if you're a peated whiskey, it's a decision that your distillery has made. It's like, we want to make this style.
I thought it was specific to the location of where they were.
Here's an example that helps to reinforce this idea. Bruichladdich has a distillery in Islay. It's one of the few distilleries in Islay that has a non-peated style. Bruichladdich has 3 different labels that come out of the same distillery, and they range from non-peated, so the Bruichladdich brand is non-peated typically. They have a mid-peat level called Port Charlotte, and then they have a heavy peated style called Octomore. 3 brands, 3 different styles, 1 distillery.
And that's just based on how they cook it, on how they heat the barley.
It's the choice of the barley that they. So most distilleries aren't doing that malting process on site. They buy the malt from a commercial maltster, and they specify what level of peat they want the barley to come at. And so most distilleries are bringing in peat with a very, very tiny, bringing in barley with a tiny amount of peat. Glenfiddich is, for example, about 1 part per million.
1 part per million.
Yeah. Balvenie's roughly about 6. A Lafroig and Ardbeg Lagavulin, I believe, somewhere in the 40 to 50 range, give or take.
40 or 50 parts per million.
Yeah, but
wow.
you get the difference, right? 40 or 50 for a Lagavulin, for example, and don't quote me on the exact number, but it's in that ballpark, and then 1 or 2 for Glenfiddich. So non-peated, mid-level peat to heavy peat.
Yeah.
And then Octomore, the one that I mentioned that comes out of Bruichladdich, they have some that go up into the hundreds.
Oh, really? That's pretty powerful. I think, like, for me, the peatiness, like Lagavulin is kind of like my peak peatiness.
So the numbers are misleading because the numbers don't always reflect what you taste.
No, that's
in terms of peat.
Sure.
Alcohol, that's also somewhat true, but less so. I think when it's higher strength, you kind of feel that.
Yeah.
But with the peat level, you can have something that's 250 parts per million, and it actually doesn't drink as if it's 5 times more smoky than a 50 part per million whiskey.
Right.
We're getting into the real geeky.
No, but I love this. I love this. Don't worry about that.
So some people will find that incredibly boring, but it's one of those little understood aspects of Scotch whiskey is the peat. People know something about it. They know something about smoky whiskey. They've heard about it, but they might not necessarily know how it gets in there.
Yeah.
So that's
and having me say it's from the groundwater, which is incorrect.
Well, but this is a thing that I've heard from a lot of people, and there will be some element of truth to that. Of the water source that you use will, of course, impact your whiskey to some degree, but there are so many variables throughout the whole process, from malting to aging and everything in between, that every little piece has its part to play.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, there's also subjectivity to this conversation. Some people will say the water has more impact, and some people will say less.
Sure. Amazing.
But whatever they've done into this whiskey, it's working.
Yeah, this is
loving this Madeira cask.
Yeah, it's very nice once you water it down a little.
I wonder what the age is on that though, because it's clearly aged. The label says 2023, but that's just been printed on there.
Yeah, you don't think that's
It's got to be.
I love this actually. I just saw this. Hold on one sec. I just saw this. It's this is cask number 45,206.
This is cask number 1.
That's number 1.
1 of 1.
1 of 1.
This
yeah,
would be worth a lot.
That would be. Yeah, this is 1 of. Who wants this? It's 1 of 45,000.
Yeah, whatever.
Amazing. So you back to your multimedia course that you took.
Yeah. Led
you into this whole another universe of doing marketing, then becoming an ambassador for a whiskey distillery. I mean, it's serendipitous that you moved to the United States and then ended up working for a Scottish, for a company that has this kind of like Scottish lineage.
Delighted that it happened that way.
Yeah.
Would probably never have thought to get involved in alcohol as a profession or Scotch whiskey, But it's so cool to be around. I don't tend to travel around the world. It's mostly around the US for the job, but to be overseas to represent something from your homeland and something that you truly enjoy and respect
and appreciate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like someone asked me the other day, "Do you like whiskey?" I was like, "Yes, I like whiskey."
Yeah.
I mean, there are people that work in the industry that don't drink it.
Yeah.
Right. But I've been doing this for 14 years, 12 years full time, but 14 years I've been talking about this brand. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do enjoy it.
Yeah. It definitely, you can't fake the enthusiasm. That's for sure. It's part of you now.
We were talking about this recently about how, people can smell a lie, people can smell BS, and people can sense when you're not being genuine.
Absolutely.
It's crazy. Like if you walk into a room and you think you're pulling the wool over someone's eyes, they know. They might not let you know that they know, but they can sense it most of the time.
Yeah. They don't want to call you out on it, right?
Probably not.
No.
But I think it's evident with, most people that I know that work in this industry. They truly, genuinely love it.
Yeah.
And enjoy it.
It's amazing.
But, it's not hard when it's that delicious.
It's so good. So back to my China days. So I was I got into China. I got into China in 2002, and it was really hard to find single malt Scottish whiskey. Like you could find it at a nice restaurant, at a bar, 5-star hotel. This is back in Shanghai when it wasn't like really well developed yet. But you couldn't like just go to a grocery store. And they didn't even really have like fine alcohol shops. They did, but it was for the Chinese baijiu, the rice wine and stuff like this. Like they didn't really carry Scottish whiskey. And then all of a sudden in like 2006, 7, 8, maybe closer to 2010, like single malt Scottish whiskey just exploded in Asia, and it was just available like everywhere. And it was always available at duty free. So that was when I would usually pick some up. Like when I was flying in and out, I'd grab a couple bottles. They would last me until my next trip, right? But I just remember this huge like explosion of all of a sudden it was everywhere, and it almost felt like it was overnight because Scottish whiskey has been on a complete rocket ship the last like 20 years, and it's been incredible.
It has. It's had some challenges lately.
Yeah,
but I don't know exactly when it started in China, but I know that when I started with the company full time was 2012. It was already well on its way to being everywhere in China. As far as I could tell, it was like a big deal. It's a big market,
huge market. Yeah,
the US is still the biggest market by value. Last year was the first year that France was not the biggest market by volume.
Oh, really? So France is normally the biggest market by volume
for Scotch whiskey.
For Scotch whiskey.
So that's blended, single malts, all Scotch whiskey collectively. And this was a question that I would ask at tastings. If anyone can tell me what the biggest country by volume consumer of Scotch in the world.
Yeah, I would have said China.
People say China, Japan, US, Scotland. It's like, settle down. I know we like to drink, but 5 million people.
Yeah.
France.
Wow.
But they don't tend to drink as much of the malts. It's getting more popular, but it was a lot of blends.
Okay, so this is my take on the blended versus single malt. We're here now. Okay, so single malt whiskey is when all of the whiskey in the barrel and all of the whiskey in the bottle comes from a single distillery. And then blended whiskey is when that brand, that label on the bottle, that company goes to many different distilleries and gets whiskey from a bunch of different distilleries and then mixes it, ages it, and maybe does something to it to kind of, I don't know, make it whatever they want to turn it into. But that's my take on what a blended whiskey is versus a single malt. How did I do?
None of that is incorrect.
None of that is incorrect, but it's not the full picture.
Correct. There's much more to it. But what you've said is actually a really good, easy, quick way to document that.
Well, sure. Like so take the Glenfiddich here. All of this whiskey was made at the Glenfiddich distillery.
Correct.
All of it was bottled at the Glenfiddich distillery. All of it was aged at the Glenfiddich distillery. In the casks, the whole thing. But if this was Johnny Walker,
Yep.
which is a very famous brand all around the world. That's a blended whiskey.
Right.
So they don't do all of it at one distillery. They spread it out across many distilleries.
Correct.
And a lot of these distilleries aren't even owned by Johnny Walker. They're owned by other companies. Some of them can be single malt whiskeys that have come from other distilleries, but they've been brought in to make Johnny Walker whatever Johnny Walker tastes like.
Yep. The thing that the blends and the single malts have in common is that all the whiskey comes from Scotland, if it's Scotch.
Sure.
The Scotch word guarantees that the product's from Scottish distilleries. The bit where you have to go into more detail, and it's important, it's important if you care about the actual reason why these styles taste different, and they do. And how do they taste different? Well, a single malt on average is going to deliver this intensity, this complexity, and it's going to have that when you taste it, typically it's going to have somewhat of a finish on it that just kind of dissipates over time. A blended Scotch, because it has a lot of grain whiskey in it that is not malt whiskey, and we'll get into that in a second, but the grain whiskey is much lighter in style, and typically a blended Scotch will be about 2/3, 3/4 will be the grain whiskey, which is made from wheat, and then the rest of it is made up with different malts. So the grain whiskey is like the backbone, the substance, or the substance is the wrong word, but it's almost like the volume, and then the malts help to layer flavour on top, because the grain is very light and delicate. The malt whiskies are more robust, heavy, complex. So most of the blended Scotch is grain whiskey and then malt whiskey on top. And if you look at a malt whiskey, it's produced 100% by distilling in batches in copper pot stills using only malted barley. So that is malt whiskey, right? Forget the single part for a second. It's malt whiskey. It's made from barley and it's distilled in copper pot stills, twice distilled. Now, the backbone of the blends is grain whiskey, and that is produced using a different type of distillation method. It's completely different. It's continuous distillation, a column still. It's not as sexy, it's not as beautiful as these copper pot stills that you've seen. A continuous still is this massive piece of industrial apparatus that creates spirit at a much higher level of alcohol, a much greater rate, and it just continuously churns out spirit, right? And so blended Scotch is not only a blend of different distilleries, but it's a blend of more than one style of whiskey. It's one or more grain whiskies mixed with one or more malt whiskies.
Oh.
So there's what you said is 100% correct, but there's more underneath, and it's important to know that, because we take casks from our warehouse, many casks, and blend them together to get a product. But because they're all from our one distillery,
it's a single malt.
It's allowed to be called single malt. Our sister distillery, Balvenie, imagine this is a Balvenie and this is a Glenfiddich. If I take a teaspoon out of the Balvenie and put it into Glenfiddich, it's still all malt whiskey, but it's no longer a single malt because it's two distilleries. So what is it called then?
It's blended.
No. There's more. It's a blended malt. See, it's confusing. There's more than one category. There's blended Scotch, there's blended malt Scotch, there's single malt Scotch, and there's single grain, and there's blended grain. There's actually 5 styles of Scotch whisky, but the typical ones we talk about is blended and single malt. And I find every time I talk about this subject, I feel myself falling asleep, because it's very, very technical.
No, I'm in it.
And it's very, very detailed, and for most people it's just like, I don't care what kind of cask is it in, right? And I get that. But there's much more to it, and like I said, it's a very difficult thing to articulate very succinctly. But here we are. So we got time.
Should we get into this?
Yes.
Should we get into this other one here?
Enough chat.
Let's drink. I love that sound. So I do these Whiskey Wednesdays on my Instagram, where I just have a thought of a day or a topic of a day, and I drink and ask people to comment or give me some advice for something, and I absolutely love it. And okay, hold on, let's go back to this. All right, so we can try out this little taster. So where are we going to nose this first?
Yeah. There's
what are we at?
So with you,
59% alcohol on this one.
So the red color, right? European oak, also known as a sherry cask. coming from Spain.
Yeah, I've been to Cadiz. Where they make sherry.
Jerez.
And I went to one of these places where they make the sherry, and they said they send the casks to Scotland afterwards.
Yeah. And basically, our demand for sherry casks way outstrips sherry production for people that drink sherry. So typically the big Scotch whisky producers will have contracts with different producers of casks in Spain, in Jerez, where they create an amount of casks strictly for the Scotch whisky industry. So they'll have sherry that's not typically used for the products that they drink. They fill the sherry into their European oak casks and leave it there for 2 years. The point is, it helps to take out some of that intensity from the oak, and they take that sherry, they use it for the next batch and the next batch, and eventually they make a vinaigrette out of that sherry.
Okay.
They do different things, but I think vinaigrette is one of the main uses for it. And then those casks are shipped to Scotland. The casks are 500 litres, and to put that in perspective, that's 200. A bourbon barrel is about 200. Sherry butt, a European oak, is 500. So 2.5 times the size. They are typically about $1,000 a piece, versus an American oak barrel, which is about $60-$80 a piece.
And that's just buying the barrels.
Just one barrel.
That's crazy.
That price might not be 100% accurate depending on the volume that's been purchased, but that is the numbers that we typically talk about. So it's like, so they're 2.5 times the size, sherry versus bourbon, but they're also like 10 times the price.
Right. And is that why sherry, like a sherry aged Glenfiddich would be more expensive than a bourbon aged?
It's almost like we teed that one up. So we recently released a new Glenfiddich 12-year-old Amontillado sherry cask finish. It's a little bit of a premium price to the original 12. They're both 12 years old, but because we're using this more rare sherry cask, harder to find, harder to get, more expensive, there's a little premium price on top.
Sure. Yeah, that price has to be passed on to the consumer at some stage. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you going to do?
Okay, so what do we got here?
And so with sherry cask, not cherry. A lot of people think cherry. Sherry. And from Jerez. There's like this is the smell that reminds me of inside the warehouse, right? It's like this kind of musty. Actually, what you can do is pour a tiny bit on your hand.
Yeah.
And rub it together. And this is going to remind you of the smell. Go ahead.
Yeah, hold on. We're filming you first. Okay.
You can smell my aftershave. Chanel Blue.
Okay.
But it can give you that smell of inside the warehouse.
Yeah.
And you rub off the alcohol and you're left with the damp wood smell.
Oh yeah, I just want to smell like whiskey all the time. Just get it in there, right? It's gonna. We just created a new product. It's a single malt whiskey skincare product. Oh, not bad. Very very strong on the alcohol. So we'll put a little more water in.
Here's something that is not really well documented or universally known, but I've noticed this, and I've talked to Brian about this, our master distiller, that sherry cask whiskies tend not to be able to hold as much water as an American oak.
Oh, really?
Whiskey. For some reason, I don't know, but for some reason, a sherry cask whiskey is easier to over dilute than an American oak aged whiskey.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's probably something to do with the tannins, because European oak casks have a higher tannin level, so it's potentially something to do with that, but I don't know for sure.
Interesting.
Look it up.
We'll look it up.
Into ChatGPT.
All right, so this is our sherry cask Glenfiddich.
And what age is this? It was 2009, so it's where are we? 15 years old. Yeah.
That's nice, huh? And it's still such a high alcohol content, so it hasn't been burned off, vaporized, evaporated. That's what I'm getting at. My vocabulary starts to slide when we start drinking whiskey. I don't know, does that happen to you too?
Whatever works, right? Very different. It's a lot more, well, interested to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, definitely with the water in it, it definitely dilutes it a little bit, takes the sting of the alcohol out of it. But yeah, you can definitely taste the sherry cask,
There's a bit more,
and it feels like it's a little flowery.
yeah, it's got a dryness to it as well.
Yeah,
Like, I think that the Madeira cask was a little bit more, had a little bit more of an oily syrupiness to it. This is like rich, raisiny, but has that little dryness in the finish.
yeah. I definitely have difficulty pulling out the context of the smells with the higher alcohol content, because like actually it's so high, even with the water in it. Even when you nose it, you can't really even smell. You just smell the alcohol. But it's getting there. It's getting there.
I like sherry cask whiskies, but I prefer like wine casks.
Yeah.
I know sherry's a wine, but like
Is sherry a wine or is it just sherry?
it's a fortified wine, isn't it?
I don't know. I went to a sherry distillery and they explained it all, but I can't remember.
I think what I'm getting at is here, I like wine casks that have been coming from an American oak,
Okay.
right? So the sherry casks are very specific, but they start to kind of taste very similar. You know, if you put down 10 sherry cask whiskies and you taste them all, it's kind of like bourbon in that way.
Yeah.
It's almost a little bit one-dimensional.
It's a little sweeter for sure, right?
It's yes and no. I think it tricks you into thinking it's sweeter, but then it dries your mouth out.
Okay.
You know, when you drink this, I mean, it doesn't have this kind of syrupy sweetness that the Madeira cask had.
Mm-hmm.
That's my interpretation, but it's a known thing that European oak has more tannins, and tannins tend to dry you out.
Interesting. Yeah.
Is it?
It is. Yeah. No. This is fantastic. I mean, so okay. Here's another one for you. How many events do you do a month on the whiskey circuit?
We do way less than we used to do. We used to do 50, 60, 70 in a year. Dinners, tastings. Our target this year is to probably do a couple a month.
Okay.
Because we've got different focuses now. One of our biggest focuses is to build relationships with the people that buy this stuff.
Yeah. I mean,
Which was always
is why I'm excited you're here.
which was always a thing. But you know, to do media, to do stuff like this, to do training for bar staff.
Sure.
But a big focus is to build relationships with the people that might want to buy a 21 or a 30-year-old.
It's very strange, isn't it? Because like most alcohol companies market through sports. But like Johnny Walker is one, Moet Hennessy, Champagne, you see them at sporting events, you see their logos on the sides of cars and stuff like that. But single malt whiskey really doesn't do that kind of marketing, do they?
No. I think I know Johnny Walker was doing a partnership with Formula One.
Yeah, Johnny Walker, big in Formula One. I can't remember which team they sponsor though.
So if they're doing it, the question is why our single malt is not doing it. I don't know the answer to that, but I guess Johnny Walker is maybe just going for a larger reach.
Well, it's a lower quality product in my mind.
Well, it depends, right? Because I wouldn't necessarily say that's fair, because
Lower price point.
well, but you've got within Johnny Walker, you've got a range from red, black, green, gold, blue, and then everything in between.
Right.
So the blue is phenomenal.
Very expensive, yeah.
And the red is an entry point. A lot of people would mix that.
Yeah.
The black is something that I think a lot of people have drank in their time if they're whiskey drinkers.
Yeah.
Well, I know I did. And then the green and the gold are a little bit less known, and the blue is like that pinnacle, gifting and stuff like that. Like, we've got 21-year-olds, we've got 30-year-olds. Johnny Walker's got their blue, but it's a blend. So to compare it to a single malt is not apples to apples, really, because it's got that grain whiskey in there. It's a different product. It's blended Scotch sells more nationally, internationally, because it has a more approachable style. It's not as intense,
Right.
so it's easier to drink it.
Huh.
So when I
And Johnny Walker has a huge marketing budget. Like, I don't know what they're doing. Diageo, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a monstrous brand, a very successful brand, and arguably the brand that's helped to bring Scotch whisky to where it is today. Even though it's a blend, but you've got tremendous single malt brands that cater to that market. But if you sat down, a blended Scotch or 5 blended Scotches and 5 single malt Scotches, if you've got a decent enough palate, it's not that hard to pick out which is which.
Yeah.
Like someone that doesn't really drink whiskey would never be able to do it. But if you like us, we could pick out, because what happens is with the blends is that you pick it up, you taste it, you're like, delicious, gone.
Yeah. It doesn't linger. It doesn't stay with you.
That's why people like it, because it's easy to drink. Whereas a single malt,
it's easy to forget.
It's easy to forget. It's easy to forget.
It's easy to forget. You drink it and it's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's it's like, have I even had a sip yet? It's like, well, glass is empty. But the malt whiskey, I think there's a lot of people out there that are a bit more particular. They say, oh, I don't drink blends and this and that.
I'm one of those guys. For sure, yeah, I don't drink blended whiskey.
I'll drink a blended whiskey as long as it's good.
As long as it's good. That's a nice little caveat to throw in there at the end.
Well, I mean, there's single malts that aren't great.
There's a lot of single malts that are really rough, yeah. Yeah, especially in anything that's less than 12 years old. Or for me, it's really the alcohol content. Like, I can't handle a single malt that's up around like 48, 50, 52 proof. Like, like the alcohol percentage just kills the flavor for me.
Ice cube, water, customize it.
Yeah, customize it, but I also just, again, if I'm chilling it, then
that helps.
That helps. It helps a little bit, but the flavor is still the.
Just don't use those stones. Those whiskey stones.
Have those whiskey stones too.
Yeah, but you'll take your teeth out. It's not good.
What was the other fad that was going on there for a while? It was like those massive ice cubes that melt really slowly, that people put in their whiskeys in order to, so with the taste wouldn't change so fast.
It's an absolute fallacy, because there's so much ice, there's so much mass in the glass that eventually that's melting.
Yeah.
And I get the idea, bigger cube, slower melt. Well, guess what? You have a smaller cube, it can only melt so much. So the smaller cube, it beats the big cube every day for that conversation.
Yeah. But it was quite fancy back in the day when you'd get a glass and have like this huge ball of whiskey in there.
We ordered a whiskey last night, and I said, my friend said, do you want it neat or do you want it a rock? I says, a small ice cube, please. And I guess he ordered that, but the bartender just heard ice cube and whiskey, and so he put the 3 big rocks in. I didn't even care. I was like, whatever, we'll just have it. But within 2 sips, it's already watered down.
Yeah.
So I don't recommend the big cubes.
No.
Don't have to be fancy ice. Just a little regular ice cube.
Bad.
If you want to go that way.
If you see, I have not got into the full customization of these whiskeys yet. I think I still just enjoyed drinking them and just picking and choosing based on the alcohol content and the cask and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, I strongly encourage you to do what you want, but I do encourage you to play with it, because there's no rules to it.
Yeah.
It's definitely. I mean, I went to. The first time I had a whiskey with David Stewart, who has been in the industry for over 60 years.
Yeah.
He's the master distiller, was the master distiller at the Balvenie. He's recently passed the reins on to Kelsey.
Right. David Stewart's name is on like every single Balvenie bottle.
Correct.
Yeah.
So let's just assume that what he does with his whiskey is fair, it's not blasphemy.
Right.
So I'm standing there, he's got a glass of water, a little nip of Balvenie, and without hesitation, he doesn't look for a straw, he doesn't look for a spoon, he just does this. It just pours. I mean, I would say it was at least 50% of what the whiskey was water.
Oh, really?
Unfussy. Just, I like water in my whiskey.
Boom.
Boom. Off we go.
Pure customization. That's interesting. That's a nice little story. What about this? No one really gets this, but how crazy is Dufftown?
as a whiskey lover, it's insane.
Because they have that one whiskey shop there, which is like, it has the most whiskeys of any other whiskey shop in the world in that one. It's just called the Whiskey Shop. I have a photo of it. I was in there, and they ship globally. I love this whiskey shop. Yeah,
It's a cool.
I remember
going.
going.
They're pricey. They know they've got tourists coming in there.
They know I was a tourist. Yeah, exactly. But how amazing is it that, like, Balvenie, Glenfiddich, like, they're all like right in Dufftown.
They're all there.
Yeah.
And the gentleman who started the Glenfiddich and Balvenie distilleries, William Grant, he worked at another distillery in Dufftown prior to starting these distilleries. He worked at Mortlach for 20 years.
I've had Mortlach, yeah. No, I know that brand.
And he worked there, decided he knew what he was doing. He was going to build his own distillery, and here we are today with a whole portfolio of spirits that's still family owned by the same company.
Yeah.
So
Not bad.
it was started in 1887 by William Grant and his family. But it's an inspirational story, because he was 46 years old. And then, a lot of people would think that at that point you're like, well, that's risky, taking your life savings and building a distillery, and you've got this family, seven sons, 2 daughters and a wife, and to give up a steady job that he'd been in for 20 years. And he took most of his savings, and I mean, it's amazing what ended up happening. I don't know. Be interested to actually know, like, what level of success did he experience in his time?
Yeah, I mean, the distillery could have been hugely unprofitable for the rest of his life, right? And then the next generation would have seen the advantages that he laid the groundwork for.
Someone probably knows the answer to this, but I know I've seen documents in the paperwork which goes back to, or if you look at 1963, there's ledgers that show when Glenfiddich was first exported outside of Scotland, because back in the early 60s, pretty much everything that was being exported out of Scotland internationally was blended Scotch. Single malt Scotch was a thing. In fact, the name single malt Scotch didn't exist. There was names like pure malt and straight malt, and it wasn't settled as single malts. But the Grant family said, hey, we're going to take our own whiskey as one product from one distillery, and we're going to market it overseas. It hadn't been done in any scale yet. So there's ledgers that show from 1963 to 1973 the growth, and also shows the competitors. And it wasn't until about the 70s that other distilleries started to catch up. But that first decade, Glenfiddich kind of owned the single malt market, or the straight malt market.
That's crazy.
Globally.
And that's like what, like 100 years after William Grant decided to found the distillery, right?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
he wouldn't have known about this revelation.
No.
But pretty amazing that happened.
Yeah. I mean to think about going into a business like that at a time when Scotch whiskey was basically only drank in Scotland. Like, there was no export of it, right? Like, it's wild to think, like, if you're an entrepreneur today, basically everything you do is global, because everything's on the internet, everything has a website, blah, blah, blah. But can you imagine, like, investing your life savings in a business that essentially is local or regional, right? Without a wide reach at all.
Yeah.
And then 100 years after you're dead, you can get it in every corner of the world and everyone's talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. And most of the malt whiskey distilleries that we know are owned by large companies that got nothing to do with the origins of that brand.
Yeah. Conglomerates, right? Like Diageo has like 30 brands or something like that.
Which absolutely doesn't mean that it affects the quality of a whiskey, obviously, but it's just very cool to have such huge brands owned by the same independent company.
Yeah.
I mean, does it make the whiskey better? People will argue it does, but it's certainly a great story.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what do we have? What do we have back here? Let's get into this for a second.
Okay. We have
the
Yozakura.
What is a what's a Yozakura?
Yozakura, as you can see with the bottle,
Yeah.
The package, It's the cherry blossoms.
Oh, right.
It's the cherry blossoms from Japan.
Made famous.
Yozakura. Yozakura is the viewing of cherry blossoms at night.
That's cool.
And so the reason for this, I mean, it looks cool, right? It's a cool name.
Right.
It's a pretty cool tie-in with the story, but you're like, well, okay, well, what's that got to do with whiskey? There is a true tie-in with this whiskey with Japan and Japanese culture, specifically drinking culture. So there's a product that I was unaware of until we started to talk about this whiskey called Awamori. It's on the label.
Right.
Awamori, are you familiar?
No.
Neither was I. Awamori is a rice spirit.
Rice spirit. Right. Like a rice wine, yeah.
Yeah, rice-based, like everyone always thinks about sake. It's a rice-based spirit that is only typically found in the southern islands of Japan, Okinawa, I believe.
Okay.
And it's typically not aged in oak. It's usually stored in clay pots.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. And we did a launch event for this in LA at a restaurant called Nico X downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool spot. And we had an amazing dinner, but we also tasted some of the Awamori, and we had a welcome cocktail that had the Awamori in it. What does it taste like? I don't know. It's not super memorable.
Yeah.
But it gave us an opportunity. We have Brian Kinsman's got a team of people that are always on the hunt for something new, something unusual that we can play with. So they managed to find a producer that actually was putting it into oak, the Awamori, for whatever reason. I guess they were experimenting. So we managed to get our hands on some of those casks, and they decided it wasn't originally going to be a 29-year-old. It was going to be something younger, but Brian decided that it required a little bit of an older flavour profile, an older style of whiskey to make sense with the Awamori cask finish.
Interesting.
And so that's like the fun of one of the fun parts, I guess, of his job is to really just experiment and try things, and if it doesn't work, you can tweak it, and you can tweak it again and then eventually it might become a product, and some of them just go to the graveyard and never see the light of day. Right. This one thankfully did. I love it. It's higher strength again, but not as high as these cask strengths, 45.1. It's a 29-year-old. So 29 years, pretty much this will be aged in ex-bourbon barrels and some sherry casks.
Okay.
That's the house style for Glenfiddich, right? So most of the whiskies that you find from Glenfiddich will start off that way. Mostly bourbon barrel, a little bit sherry, blend them together, in this case after 29 years. And of course you use the word blend, but as long as it's all from our whiskey distillery, it's still a single malt. And then at the end of that process, it goes into the Awamori casks for maybe 3 to 6 months.
Okay, just for that finish.
Yeah.
That's nice.
So the finish is, for anyone that's not familiar with that terminology, finish means that you've taken your whiskey from one type of aging vessel, like American oak or whatever, and then you place it into a different type of oak,
Yeah.
So, like, for example, the Balvenie's classic entry point is the double wood. It's 12 years in American oak, and then the last 6 to 9 months in the sherry cask.
My favorite Balvenie is definitely the 14-year-old Caribbean rum casks. Those are lovely.
That is a very, very well-made whiskey, and a big fan favourite for a lot of people, myself included. I remember the first time we opened a bottle of that, and we turned around, and it was almost gone very quickly. It was me and Mossy.
I love this little like peekaboo door.
Yeah, I love these. This is part of the Grand Series. We have the 21-year-old rum cask that we started with is the entry point for the Grand Series. So that would be retailing for about $250 a bottle. Okay. Then you can go up to 23, the Grand Cru. It's about $350, $400 almost. Then a 26 Grand Cron finished in cognac barrels for 2 years. That's about $600. And then this was a limited edition. Those other ones are always available. This was a limited edition. There's still a couple kicking around you can find if you're lucky. But say that it's a high price point. It's I think it's just short of $2,000.
$2,000.
There was only 1,500 of these bottles made available in the US. So it is this collectible, but very drinkable also.
You got to drink it. Okay, here we go. Let's nose this one a little.
Something different.
Something different for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But what? Hard to say.
It's nice. It's it's nice to taste something that's not as strong with the alcohol, right?
You don't need to mess with it.
No, you don't.
Can, but it's good to go.
It's good to go. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
Plus,
it's good to go.
The fact is, we've just had 3 sips of, well, at least 2 high-strength whiskies.
Mhm.
Your palate's warmed up. It's going to be able to withstand this heat a little bit better.
Yeah.
The first whiskey of the day, that's why I selected the 21. It's an easy one to start with.
It's a good breakfast whiskey.
I could say that, you know.
Did you ever hear this? So I was at a distillery doing a tasting, and okay, so the tastings, the distillery tour started at 9:00. Okay, and we all met in the lobby. It was in Dufftown, but it wasn't a Glenfiddich or William Grant company, but it was another one. And so it started at 9:00. There were like 4 or 5 of us, and from 9:00 to like 9:55, we did a tour, saw how they made it, distilled everything. Okay, and then 9:55 we go to the tasting room, and we've got like, you know, the board, and we've got the 5 whiskeys, you know, something casks, 12, 15, 20, something like that, to give it a different flavor of what they make. And then everything was set. We sit down, and then everyone just looks at the clock, because you're not allowed to serve whiskey in Scotland before 10 a.m.
And at the airport.
And that's like, except unless you're at the airport or something like that, right? So it was funny that like that's the only rule anyone cared about.
The airport's a trip. Glasgow airport, everyone's on pints.
Yeah.
Everyone's having a pint of tenants. They're going on their holidays.
Well, wait.
8:00 in the morning.
Wait till you go through Dubai. I mean, Dubai's crazy because you'll be sitting there at 4 a.m., but it's 5 p.m. for half the people in there, right? So everyone's like having hot, you know, like I would wake up at like 3 in the morning, get to the airport at 5 for a flight or something like that. And there'd be people around there having burgers and like big pints of beer because they're, you know, it's mid-afternoon or whatever for them. And you're just thinking, oh my God, like what a global existence, right?
It's I have mixed feelings about that, right? But it does make sense. It's like every time you go to the airport, there's just people boozing, and sometimes you're just like,
yeah,
like, what's wrong with a cup of coffee? But, you know, people are going on the holiday. Like, I'm jaded because I work in the alcohol industry, and sometimes I'm like, I just want to get away from booze.
Yeah, I bet, it's impossible. But this is really lovely. So what are we smelling in this?
I don't know, honestly. I think the first time I drank this, I had this feeling that there was a savoury element to it.
Right.
So the Madeira cask, the sherry cask, they had some level of sweetness to it.
Yeah.
Not that this doesn't, but it has some more depth to it that I would describe as being a savoury note. That on the nose, it was quite unusual. It's hard to pick out.
You can taste it though. I can't describe what it is, but you can definitely taste that note of that Japanese rice wine.
It's confusing because I want to say aromatic, but that doesn't really pinpoint what it is.
Yeah.
It's like a combination of a few different things, but the awamori is like something that we're not used to in the Scotch world. You know, rice spirits.
No. Well, their rice spirits are all the rage in Asia. I mean, in China, they've got like 10,000 different rice wines and rice liquors, right? I think Diageo even bought some of the biggest brands in China because they're so huge and money making. But for me, I never kind of got used to the taste of them because I lived in China for like 18 years, right? So anytime you go to a dinner, like drinking in Asia is very competitive. So it can really get fucking out of hand in a hurry. So you know, I was working for all these international newspapers and magazines. So when we did visit a factory or we did visit a company and stuff like that, they would always want to have drinks with us or dinner with us and stuff like this. And it got out of hand. We just had to start saying no all the time because like all these big business people, they just want to like drink with you. Like you have one, I have to have one. I have to have one, you have to have one. And it gets so out of hand so fast. And you know what I started doing is I fucking bought a car and I would just show up to dinner and I would put my fucking keys on the table. And I'd be like, I'm not drinking because it was just competitive. It was insanity.
Well, I've heard this from more than one source of friends and colleagues that live in Asia, Singapore, but they travel around, and I was shocked because we always hear about, you know, this I guess fallacy that a lot of Asian people struggle with alcohol.
Well, they do struggle with it,
Right.
but it doesn't stop them.
Right.
Like
But we I guess we only hear half the story. We hear that and then we assume other things like, oh, they don't drink a lot. And the stories I've heard, I'm like, thank God I don't live over there.
Yeah, it's insane.
Because it's bad enough here and it's bad enough in the UK with the drink culture. You know, it can get out of hand pretty easily. But it sounds like over there it really is like a sport.
It really can be, and
With some people, with the wrong people,
the wrong people. With in China specifically, there's a lot of Chinese people that are actually allergic to alcohol, and they have like an allergic reaction, and their face goes red, like their whole body can go red.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop them. Like you know, just after one beer, they're just, you know, like Rudolph.
Yeah, you're like,
red
well,
nose.
red, might as well get more red.
Might as well just keep on trucking. Yeah. And I kind of grew up like as an adult. I joke about, like, I grew up as an adult in China, because I was there from when I was 22 to 2019 or 18. So I spent like my whole like adult youth in China, and I was there at a time when like people's salaries went crazy. Like if you were living in Shanghai between 2002 and 2018, and you were kind of like in your 20s or 30s, like your salary, you know, 10x'd in a decade, and that, you know, delivered huge amounts of wealth to the city. But the drinking and driving was terrifying, because you know, if you're you know, in 2003 or 4, you might have gone out for dinner with friends and taken a taxi home. Taxis were very reasonably priced, or a bicycle even. The drinking and bicycling was terrifying, especially in Beijing sometimes. But then as salaries increased and money just was everywhere, by 2010, like, you know, you're driving a Mercedes, right? And you want all your friends to see it, so you drive it to dinner. But the drinking doesn't stop. And people were just wrapping their cars around light posts and, you know, people. And it was insane, yeah, because they were just getting a hold of the drink driving culture, whereas like you and I had kind of grown up with it, I guess. And how that was like not a good thing.
Well, I noticed a big difference between the UK and Texas specifically when I moved there.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot more socially accepted to drink drive.
In the UK or in Texas?
No, in Texas.
Yeah.
It's not something that's tolerated in the UK.
Well, even in LA, I mean, it's insane. Like everyone in LA is either drink driving or smoking weed and driving.
When I moved to Texas, Uber didn't exist, and getting a taxi was a nightmare. So I'm not saying I understand it, but now, come on.
Now there's no excuse.
There really is.
It really is.
Because you could say back in the day, say, well, okay, someone, if they don't drive, how are they going to get anywhere? It's like, well, okay, don't drink, okay, but there's some level of understanding, I guess. But now you get Ubers, like,
yeah,
what are you doing?
There's no excuse. No, it's terrifying.
No, if I'm going anywhere that's drink related, I'm Ubering. You know.
Yeah.
And that's because the company pays for it.
There you go.
The company's, I'm doing work for the company. They're paying for me to get there safely, and it all works out.
Yeah. No, it's nice. You know what though? I like going out, like not drinking, you know, having dinner or whatever like that. And then I like coming home and having a few and just putting the feet up. And like, you know, end of day, like I ticked all my boxes. I finished everything I needed to do today. I had a nice dinner with some friends. You know, maybe sometimes I'll have a whiskey instead of having dessert, because like I find whiskey to be an appetite suppressor. So if I have like a whiskey before dinner, I tend to eat less. And instead of having you know, a cake or a pie or an ice cream or something, I'll have a dram for dessert, and it totally kills that desire to have sugar or to have something sweet. I don't know. Is that just a thing or is that me?
It reminds me of an old joke about the whiskey diet.
Yeah, it is a whiskey diet. It's like a heroin diet, right? For a supermodel or something.
My friend Lauren loves that one. I think, is it like, I'm on a whiskey diet, I've lost 3 days already? Something like that.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. This is nice, actually.
it grows on you, right? Because at first you're kind of like trying to figure out what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
and especially after tasting some really powerful, flavorful whiskies.
Yeah.
Now I'm settling into this,
Yeah. And you can just actually sit back and enjoy it. You don't have to think about it too much, and it's just there.
and this one, it hangs around for a while.
It lingers. Yeah. It's very tasty.
Really nice.
That's amazing.
First time we tried this was in the restaurant, Niku X.
Oh, really?
We had given them a bottle because they were serving a tomahawk steak tableside, and they wanted to spray the tomahawk steak in the walk-in fridge with the whiskey.
With a $2,000 bottle of
Yep.
Glenfiddich.
So we let them. We gave them the bottle. We get there to try it with the staff one day. They pull it out the fridge. And as you know, putting whiskey in the fridge, you can't taste it as much.
Yeah.
It contracts your ability to smell because you've cooled it down. It's like, I don't know if it's a great analogy, but taking an apple pie out the freezer versus taking it out of the oven.
Right. It suppresses the aromas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It locks it in.
Mm.
And that's what ice and cooling down the whiskey does. It kind of locks in the aromas so you can't access it as much. So they pulled this whiskey out and nobody had tasted it yet. And we go to taste it. And everyone just around the table. No one's had anything.
Because it tasted like shit.
No, it didn't taste like shit.
It just didn't taste like
It
anything.
was hard to pick up anything.
Yeah.
Because it had been in this ultra cold fridge for, best part of a week.
Yeah.
So we all sat there and were like, can't taste it. We had to let it warm up a little bit first.
Yeah. Put it in the oven. Cook the Glenfiddich a little.
Well, you could do it. My original mentor, Ian Miller, he likes to warm up his whiskey.
Yeah. Well, when you've got a proper like dram glass, yeah, and you can actually like warm it up and one of the distillery tours I did, like they would put their hands like this because then it would heat up the glass and then it would release the aromas into your nose. It just
There's no doubt
beautiful.
that is the way you're going to get the most flavour.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it's going to be the way that you enjoy it the most.
That's true.
Right. So it's like if a chef says medium rare is the best way for you to access the quality of this piece of meat, but you like it well done or even medium, well done's a bit much, right?
Sure.
I think we can all agree on that. But some people like it.
Some people love it, yeah.
If they like it, maybe we could influence them not to order that way, but maybe we can't, and maybe they just like it that way. So who's to say?
Yeah.
The person that's paying.
Customizable. Everything is customizable all the time.
It is. Like, we're in the business of customizing things. I wish I could customize my salary more. That would be wonderful.
Yes, that would be epic. When we finish this today, we'll have to make some random tweets or.
We'll have to customize it to afford another one. $2,000 a bottle.
Oh, that's a lot. So what do you have planned for the rest of 2024? What's the highlight of your calendar as a Glenfiddich ambassador for the rest of the year?
I can answer that question personally first. The highlight that's top of mind for me right now is going to Germany for the European Championships.
Oh, that's fantastic.
In June.
Amazing.
So Scotland, growing up as a Scotland football fan, the Scottish national team made every finals, the World Cup and the Euros. They made all of them pretty much growing up until the age of 18. 1998 was the last World Cup we made it.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that. But hold on. So
in France.
So go back a sec. So you grew up in Scotland loving football, soccer, not rugby.
No, I don't mess with rugby.
No.
It's a great game, but like Americans, a lot of Americans have multiple sports. I'm like, I cannot. How do you have the bandwidth? I know they can happen at different times of year. Somewhat there's some overlap. Soccer was the only sport that I was interested in.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful game.
Played golf and stuff like that. I enjoyed a game of snooker, which that's a weird one for Americans. But no, rugby wasn't really. But I watched the Six Nations, and if Scotland's playing England, I'll try and cheer them on.
Well, there's a great new Netflix documentary on the Six Nations, and it's wonderful. And the Scottish story of the Six Nations last year, I guess it would have been, is all about the first episode, and it's wonderful. Yeah.
Cool. I'll check that out.
Yeah.
What's it called again?
Yeah, I think it's just called Six Nations.
It's,
Yeah, I'll send it to you. I made a post about it on one of my social media accounts. I was watching it the other night. It's absolutely lovely.
yeah, so I said that I was going to go when Scotland finally make it to another finals. I was going to make an attempt to go to, even if I can't get a ticket, just to go and be there.
Yeah.
So
Go to the fan zone or something like that. That's
exactly.
quite cool, right?
Yeah, so I booked tickets for, I've booked hotels. I haven't booked a flight, but I booked hotels.
Yeah.
So that's something to look forward to. But in terms of like the whiskey world, I mean, we're going to release another edition of the Grand Series, which is going to be coming out as a 31-year-old. So that'll be something fun. Beyond that, I'm really looking forward to doing something I've been meaning to do for a while, which is do a Glenfiddich event on a boat.
Okay. Nice one.
One of my favourite things that I've done in the time that I've been with Glenfiddich is a boat cruise through the Chicago River.
Oh, the Chicago River is cool, isn't
Through
it?
the city.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
That is nice.
amazing. So we had 100 people on a boat. I was DJing. There was cocktails.
There you go. There you go.
served, and it was at night time, and we sailed up through the river, and it was one of my favourite memories. But I want to do that here.
What's the equivalent of that in LA?
I don't know. It's not really as interesting because it's just you're out in the ocean. So maybe it's something that's like kind of
And the ocean's rough.
yeah,
Like it's not a smooth journey. It's not like the Chicago River, right? It's
Right.
Like there's waves out there. Like it's a rough ride.
yeah. So I wonder if there is even an opportunity to do it. It might not be the move. I wonder if there's something Catalina Island based that could be fun.
Yeah. Just off Long Beach, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I've never been there yet.
I haven't been there either.
Really?
But yeah, someone was telling me about it the other day. They did like a marathon or some kind of like 10-mile or 20-mile run on Catalina Island.
Cool.
They said it was pretty cool, but I haven't been there myself.
Yeah, so maybe that's something that we'll plan. But the cool thing is, from this ambassador role standpoint, we get a lot of flexibility to activate and execute things the way we see fit. There's a general idea of what we have to do,
Right.
but we get some flexibility to partner with different, we can partner with artists, we can partner with musicians, we can partner with people that make clothing or,
Yeah.
all sorts of different things.
The Pacific Fleet is in San Diego. I'm sure there's an aircraft carrier you can DJ on for a Glenfiddich event. That would be fucking cool.
I would sign up for that.
I would go down for that.
Do you think that's a thing?
I definitely think that's I obviously it wouldn't be an active aircraft carrier. I mean,
Yeah.
but there's there's an aircraft carrier in New York, right? On the West Side Highway. There's an aircraft carrier and they do events, and I'm sure there's got to be some naval museum or something in San Diego.
Well, we actually did our company meeting. We had a big party at the Miramar location, which
Okay.
is like it's like a big hangar for the Air Force.
Yeah.
But I like your idea of doing it on the boat.
That would be fun.
That would be
epic. Yeah.
sick. I'd
You just
do
got to
that.
make sure the weather's right?
But San Diego is like 345 days of the year. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
Someone told me there's storms coming through, but I don't believe them.
No, it's too nice down there all the time. Yeah.
I love it.
All right. Well, European Championships in the summer, and maybe a Glenfiddich event where you're DJing.
On a
And
boat. Let's just get on a boat somewhere.
yeah,
Boat / the rooftop we're going to do as well, but the boat is really the main target because that's just way more fun.
can be. Well, hey, look. Thank you so much for swinging by, man.
Pleasure.
Let's do this again.
Yeah.
And get me on the list for anything you guys are doing. I'd love to come out
Absolutely.
and share my passion for the single malts.
We'd love to have you, and it's been fun to try some of these things. But what would you pick out if you had to pick a fave?
If I had to pick a fave, I would definitely do the first one we did, which is the Madeira. This was my favorite.
rum cask.
21-year, yeah, nice and smooth. No need to customize it, no need to do anything to it. Just open it, drink it,
Yeah.
enjoy it.
I agree.
I absolutely love that one.
Easy going, and it's not 2,000. It's only 250.
250 is still a lot, but it's much nicer than 2000. What about you? What was your favorite?
I actually was gravitating towards the second one we had, the Madeira cask.
Okay.
I thought that was really interesting. But as a regular go-to, the 21 is up there.
Yeah, 21 is brilliant. I love I think dollar for dollar, pound for pound, whatever you want, the Glenfiddich 18 is probably one of the best whiskeys out there. Like I'm already a Glenfiddich fan. I have been for a long, long time. But like, you know, there's go-to whiskeys where you just know that the quality's spot on, right? Like a Macallan 12, that's like these are all like affordable, right? I'm not talking about like a $500 bottle. Like a Macallan 12, Glenfiddich 18, and the Caribbean cask for Balvenie. Those are like my three, and a Lagavulin. I absolutely love Lagavulin, like a 16-year-old Lagavulin. That's
so you've got a 12, a 14, a 16, and an 18 there.
Yeah,
it's a nice spread.
So it's decent. Yeah,
yeah. You got some sherry casks, rum casks, and some peat.
Yeah. I love the Lagavulin. It's nice too. I mean, it's really enjoyable. So
big fan.
Yeah.
Well, cheers.
Cheers. So this is what we can do. Hold on. It takes me a second to. Yeah. So now we're on this one, and we cheers.
Cheers.
Great to meet you, man.
Thank you.
And thanks for bringing through some samples.
Always a pleasure.